talk's gotta wait. No more shop talk, Brian. We are live. It is John Reed and Brian Summer. Enterprise Month in Review. How you doing, Brian?
Doing just fine. Just fine.
Oh my gosh, this is going to be a classic, I think. By the way, I just want to point out you haven't totally overdressed me this time because I did a wardrobe upgrade and you don't have a tie on. So
I got one right here. I can put it on.
I realize I'm still going to give you the slight edge, but I think I'm in the ballpark this time. Kind of gives me some satisfaction. Anyway,
so is there a new person in your life? I mean, what triggered the wardrobe change?
no, I just felt like catching you off guard. Anyhow, we got a full show today, folks. If you're in the audience, please do comment and let us know what's up out there on LinkedIn in particular. If you're having any troubles with the stream, let us know. We've got a jam-packed show. Brian and I are going to go through the highs and lows, and then we got old school curmudgeon churned blogger par excellence. Frank Scavo is going to come join us on the couch. So this is going to be big.
I'm glad you brought the curmudgeon term up because I was thinking about that several times this week because there was that one moment, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, when Plex had an event in Detroit.
Oh, yeah.
And they had a whole table set up for people like you, me, Howlett, Dennis Howlett, and Frank Scavo and others. And they had a big name tent thing for that one table, Curmudgeon's Row.
Curmudgeon's Row, it was. Yeah, there's still some pictures of that. I got another little Scavo anecdote, but that's going to wait until he arrives onto the scene, where we're going to ask Frank about a bunch of stuff, including service industry disruption in the face of AI and more. Brent Larry, yes, hi, good to see you, and indeed we are back. So Brian, the infamous slide deck, let's have a look. We got to get through our top stories pretty quick so we can get Frank in here. Here's our agenda as usual. Brian, the rundown.
If you've seen the show, you kind of know the flow. There is one addition in there. I think we put the great headlines of the month. We're just testing that out. There's a couple of them in there, but I think not to take anything away from Frank, but I think the star of the show this month is clearly some of the stories that we're going to get into as well. So anyway, let's go with that. Let's go right into the buzzword.
From Dave Kellogg.
Yeah. I pulled this from Dave volunteered this unexpectedly. He just put this out there on Twitter a couple weeks ago. And he thinks the keyword here is can't put my glasses on.
It's that's a little, the font's a little smaller there. Unlock.
And he talks about how it's being used as a noun, a verb, an adjective, and whatever. And if Dave seems to think this word is getting, let's say, too much traction out there, then I think that meets the definition of overhyped technology. So, when we get Frank on, we'll have to unlock his deeply held secrets and insights and get them out there on the table as well. So
I don't care much for unpack either, now that you mention it. But hey, writing with AI much? Hi Tracy. Yep. You know how it goes. Love to have that AI authored blog ship up on LinkedIn with all the other gurus. Hey Martin, really nice to see you. Happy Friday. Thanks for staying up late with us. I'm looking forward to some of your acerbic comments. All right. So what's next? Let's advance the info.
Well, I just thought I was playing around with this, the best headlines of the month, and maybe not the best, but the things that clearly were grabbing me. I like the one on the right. Taco Bell discovered that no one wants to use AI to order chalupas. I mean, I'd love to be inside the head of that editor that came up with that headline. But I get the story. That's right. That's certainly there. And the thing on the left was something I was thinking about closer to the beginning or whatever, the end of last month. Is this bubble too big to fail? And I thought, that's an interesting idea. And I don't think anyone's come to any consensus yet, but I would say that given the valuations of some of these companies today, there's definitely a bubble afoot right now. Anyway, that was it. Just testing.
What is it with AI drive-through fails? Taco Bell, a customer crashed the system by ordering 18,000 water cups.
Yeah.
This is going well. Anyhow, on we go. I promised that I was going to blow a gasket, and I'm going
Mhm.
to, and I'm going to, and it's about this MIT study on AI. Now, the reason I'm going to blow a gasket on it is because basically everyone got this study wrong. I want to point out gleefully also, Brian, that I'm using Thomas Webernight's post on the study, which was a pretty good post actually. But I want to point out in the title the word unlocking. That's just perfect on the heels of the Dave Kellogg's buzzword abuse flag. So Thomas, back to demerits for you. Yeah, indeed, Martin. I recall that bubble as well. It might be worth comparing those at some point. So, okay, so well, what's my axe to grind with this study? So, first of all, the media environment is making it very hard for customers to understand what's really going on with generative AI. Now, the core message of the study that was picked up on by the media, which was that it is difficult to achieve ROI and true productivity gains with AI. That is true. There's a whole bunch of studies that have been done on that, many that are a larger scale than that. The catch, of course, is that a lot of these studies that have been done that are larger scale kind of refer to older versions of this technology from a couple of years ago that I would argue are very different than what enterprise vendors are putting forth today. The big studies are mostly about customers freelancing with these earlier versions of these tools. But there's a whole bunch of other problems with this study. First of all, the study was claimed to be an MIT study. It was actually put out by a very small group inside of MIT called Nanda. And after they put out the study the same day, suddenly it disappeared from the web and you had to fill out a Google form. MIT did never endorse this study, first of all, folks. Second of all, in the study itself, which was, oh, hi, Ted Rogers. Nice to see you. By the way, the folks that were invited to this, you were specifically invited by me. So that wasn't AI. That was me saying, please come. So welcome, Ted. So anyway, the Nana group is about 6 people. And believe it or not, they weren't trying to take generative AI down with this study by saying that 95% of Gen AI never gets past the pilot stage. If you look at the study, which is now accessible again through various outlets, they're infatuated with the 5% that did get past pilots. The Nana group is all about the agentic web. These folks are AI evangelists of the highest order. They wrote this study not to dismantle generative AI, but to say there's a better way forward. And some of the stuff that they think is the better way forward, I would argue is perhaps not exactly what I would, chart. But the whole point is that they're trying to get us to look at why these projects failed and why they think a much more successful generation of AI products is coming. And they call it crossing the Gen AI divide. And they talk about what it takes to cross that divide. And it's really quite interesting. And oh, by the way, they admit right in the study, they admit that they have a really small sample size of 52 organizations. So basically this actually influenced the stock market. This informal study by this group inside of MIT, this little group that interviewed 52 people, rocked global markets. I mean, I think that should give a lot of us pause in terms of how we consume information at this point in time. But at any rate, there's some really interesting stuff, and I won't get into all of this stuff on what they talk about in terms of crossing the divide, but they talk about how ROI is often highest in ignored functions like operation and finance, and that the gains are coming from replacing BPOs and external agencies, not headcount reductions in internal staff. And they talk about how the back office tools are delivering a lot of impact, and they talk about a bunch of gains, including the increase of $2 to $10 million annually saved in customer service and document processing, these are areas that a lot of vendors are focused on right now. Risk checks for financial services, $1 million saved annually. And they talk about how these gains came without material workforce reduction. So there is ROI to be found without firing a bunch of people. Now, this is totally different, I think, than all the media coverage on this report. And so I just wanted to say, I hope that we can all take a step back sometimes and have shows like this where we can hash all of this stuff out, try to make sense of it, and try to understand the way forward. And the final thing I will say before I turn it over to you, Brian, for any color you might have, is that I just wrote another piece on context intelligence on Diginomica today. And a big part of why some vendors are getting better results is they're paying a lot of attention to helping LLMs be smarter by embedding them into critical workflows, as this report suggests. But also, this report doesn't get into the importance of context and feeding LLMs the right information for that customer, for that industry, for that role, for that situation. And there's no studies that exist yet at scale about that type of AI, but it's actually a constrained form of AI that constrains the LLM into compound workflows where LLMs are not idealized as this magic tool, but they're put to work and they're harnessed, but they're also held accountable for their limitations. So anyway, I think it's interesting because I would be very careful to say that because 95% of these projects fail, that there's no future for this technology. I think the authors would not want you to assume that or interpret that. So anyway, that's my gasket blown. Brian, commentary.
Hey, I don't even want to get anywhere around where your gasket blew out. So, I've got a piece. One of my articles is actually going to reference some of this study, but I'd also want to point out I saw something fascinating this week at Seismic's user conference, and I watched two software CEOs talk about the study that showed did we achieve ever greater sales efficiency with the rollout over the last 25 years of all these new technologies. I've got that written up in a report about the Seismic show. It'll be out on Diginomica, if not this weekend, on Monday. And the net of it is that when, for example, like when every company out there gets a great CRM product, there's all you've done is create an environment where people achieve competitive parity, not competitive advantage. So the opportunity to whack a lot of headcount and achieve all these new savings kind of goes away because it gets diffused back out across all companies, pretty much pro rata based on what the original sizing was. So I think the untold story in things like this is show me where the AI created classic competitive advantage, not facilitated competitive parity. And then you'll find out if there is ROI and ROI that lasts. Anyway, enough of that.
Right, exactly. And when I talked about some of those constrained LLM architectures and some of the ROI results that are being achieved, those ROI results, the reasons they're happening is because they are targeted towards very specific departments, industries, and workflows. That's not enough to move the productivity needle in a GDP type of sense. That's not, we're not there yet with that. And so rightfully so, we have not seen a productivity bump with generative AI the way we have seen, for example, during the personal computer revolution all those decades ago. So anyhow, on we go. I'm going to make quick work of my next article so we can get to yours. This next one I just thought was a really good piece in McKinsey around, they call it the octopus CEO, whatever, CIO. I don't know how many hands a CEO actually needs, but it's really all about the sort of the transition to being a more strategic business partner. But I did want to mention one thing because I think it's going to come up during our leadership conversation with Frank as well, which are these really interesting comments on from the interview guest who's a CIO on what she calls hard power and soft power. And she talks about how data privacy, compliance, security, when we weigh on that stuff, that's what she calls hard power. Everything else is quote unquote soft power, where you're working with and helping to influence people. It's reflected in a management principle I believe in. If you have to tell people what to do, you've already lost, and how that's a much more powerful form of power because it's based on collaboration. I thought that was really interesting, Brian, and I'm sure we'll I'm afraid to use the circle back around phrase, but I'm sure we will circle back around to that.
Well, I'm going to see if your left hand remembers what your right hand did. We'll
Left
later
hand,
in the show
left hand,
octopus
left hand, right hand. Indeed.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go on to your stories.
Okay, I got a couple of them here. This article by Anita Letnick is, I think, a must read. She spent some quality time, you could tell, thinking through this announcement that OpenAI was going to create a job platform. And It just didn't smell right or ring true for her. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized is that there is no way OpenAI can materially goose its valuation in the market or increase its net worth by building a job platform. I mean, that's been done to death, and it doesn't move. Wouldn't move the needle on their stock price. So why would they do this? And what she figured out is OpenAI doesn't really want to help people find jobs. Instead, what they want to find out is which employers are looking to hire, let's say, a customer service representative. Those are signals, hiring signals that OpenAI would want to intercept and use their salespeople to contact these employers, going, don't hire customer service reps when you can use customer service agents, AI agents, to do that work with no headcount. And while that sounds very dark and dystopian, I got to admit, it sounds very plausible as a strategic direction. Anyway, if all you do is read it, just to read something, it may blow out some cobwebs and get you to think some bigger kind of thoughts and longer term strategy. But that was a really good piece she did.
Yeah, and there's a lot of content out there also on how to kind of justify some of the valuations and show some revenues, how OpenAI is going to follow Meta's pathway down the surveillance technology business model. But we won't get into that lovely topic today. Brian, your next one.
Well, I just like the name that they gave the economy, because it's named after me. Obviously, you see the BS economy. But this was interesting because this article kind of takes a view of, well, let's say, if you are allowing people to use some artificial intelligence, mostly it's, I think, generative is what they're talking about. When employees are doing that, they seem to be able to collapse down the amount of work time that's required, but their overall workload isn't really changing. And what they're concluding is the delta between how much time people used to spend doing jobs and how much time they're doing now that they have these extra tools shows just how much of the economy, how much time people are wasting on things that don't really matter or add value. And that's the whole point of this story. That's it in a nutshell. It's an interesting read.
I'm not going to blow another gasket for the reference of the MIT report, because the asterisks will apply to the previous rant. On we go. Your boss doesn't have time to talk with you, Brian.
Oh, this was great. And this kind of ties in. John knows that I've been working on a book on how weird and strange management has been changing and what are the implications on the workforce. One of the big things going on is a delayering of management levels in companies. And so what we end up with is a whole lot fewer managers and bosses, and they're trying to spread themselves out over huge pyramids of people. The problem is, obviously, like the headline says, they don't have time to talk to you, and they're really leaning on AI and other kind of tools to provide like virtual coaching, virtual mentoring, virtual everything. I thought this article was really a good one for people to read, because it's a very sanguine kind of look at what companies are doing in the short term to goose up short-term earnings. And if your firm has professional management that's interested in meeting Wall Street's expectations month to month, you could see your firm probably in this story. But the long-term view here, I think, is not very positive, because if people don't get any person-to-person contact, people want to be seen as well as to see. They want to see and be seen. And if they can't do that, or they can't get that, they're going to leave. And these companies aren't developing talent pipeline or anything else to replace folks. That, again, points to a rather dystopian kind of future. John.
Indeed. I think you've said it all. I don't want to keep Frank waiting any longer. We are at the halftime show, Brian, and that means that our guest segment is coming right now. So let's say you usually have a nice little intro slide here. Oh, yeah, look at all that.
Frank's been a busy boy over the years.
Frank Scavo, what up?
By the way, Frank, when I was looking for some logos and things to put on here, I did not realize that one of the January 6 people was also named Frank Scavo. But anyway,
Yeah, he doesn't want to talk about that. Understandably so. Frank, we don't have any audio from you. You seem to appear to be muted on your end. You're not muted on this end, so play around with that a little bit. Brian, we're gonna have to like riff a little bit while Frank tries to figure out his voice, find his voice, so to speak. Let's see. So I remember.
so let's go.
What's that?
He's trying to talk, I guess.
He is trying. He's trying really hard. Frank, by the way, you can also play around with the microphone. There's like a settings thing down there. You can play around with that a little bit. Sorry, or you can try rebooting. I'm just trying to check on what's next. So Brian, why don't we go ahead to the story and then we'll get Frank's input if Frank can solve.
Yeah.
And let me just ask Tracy real quick on this point. Middle managers are so critical for development of the team. Most people stay at a company because they like their boss, or alternately leave because they do not like their boss.
That last piece was what I was going to add to Tracy's comment, and you're spot on, Tracy. And one of the key thoughts that I've been working on with this book. By the way, I'll give a recommendation. I'm reading a book right now called The Last Human Job, and it's by someone named Allison Pugh, P-U-G-H. A fascinating book. And it really talks about this whole people want to see things and their bosses included, as well as to be seen by them. And it's a bit of a chewy read, but man, it will open your eyes as to kind of where jobs and everything are going. Frank, we still got you on video, but it looks like
Frank's working. Frank, I sent you there's a private chat, so you can check that out too. I sent you one comment in there, so you can continue to experiment. Meantime, Brian, let's set up the article that we want to talk with Frank about here.
Yeah, so one thing we wanted to talk to Frank about is a Wall Street Journal piece that was called "How the AI Boom is Leaving Consultants Behind," and it's an interesting story because you could tell the author went and dug up information on all the major integrators and consulting firms, but more than that, they talked to a lot of companies who have traditionally used these people. And honestly, if they were collecting Yelp scores or something like that, Glassdoor scores about the value they got in the recent years on AI initiatives, it wouldn't be a very good story. And we've lost Frank, it looks like.
That's part of his troubleshooting. I'm glad he signed out so he can try to come back, so that's fine.
So yeah, anyway, the comments in this story, I might read one or two just real quick, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the stories, you can read a little bit here, that consultants, my view of this is that for the last 15 plus years, most firms that call themselves consultants really haven't been doing consulting. They've been configuring and implementing and converting data and setting up tables for all kinds of software packages. But as far as like spending time doing radical reinvention and reimagination of how work ought to be done, that hasn't been what they've been doing. And I don't think they've built a pipeline of people who have those kind of skills to do that kind of work and do it at scale. And that's what I think a lot of, particularly agentic AI, requires, is people to really think outside the box about a better, different way of doing things. And where is that skill? Frank, can you talk to us now?
He appears to be muted at the moment. Self-muted. Frank, you're self-muted at the moment. I can't unmute you. So, Brian, one of the things that I wanted to also... Oh, and Tracy's here with the actual consulting part is pretty rare. one of the interesting things about that is you also wrote a piece prior to this article
Yeah.
on Diginomica about Wall Street smells blood in the water. Services firms seeing 1/3 or greater reduction in stock price. Research firms like Gartner took a 50% plus hit recently. Then I kind of riffed on your piece in the weekly roundup. But one of the things that resonates with me that you pointed out here is that bottom line, like I felt the consulting industry was ripe for disruption for like a long time. And so I kind of feel like sometimes AI is getting a little too much credit in a certain way for providing outsized value at the moment. Whereas I feel like what this article is saying is that AI is kind of exposing consultants for not delivering the value that they were supposed to. You know what I mean? So
that's what this article is really big on. They didn't provide the value. They didn't really provide the skills that the client was expecting to get from these firms. These firms make all these claims about how they're leading the future and doing all this kind of stuff. And yet there are quotes all in this article with customers talking about how, a partner in a big consulting firm knows about as much on AI as somebody still in college. And if that, they're not really
Testing.
ready, I guess, for it.
And we got Frank.
Oh,
hi, Frank. We put you through the ringer there. Sorry about that, but appreciate your diligence. We got you. You're here, Frank. Oh, now Frank can talk, but he can't hear us. Well, Frank, you're halfway there, man. I'm going to mute you for a sec because we can't hear you. You can't hear us. Anyhow, once you figure out your audio, give us a thumbs up because your mic is working now. So yeah, and the other interesting thing I thought I want to ask you this. Okay. Let's get to Tracy's comments because Tracy's like on fire right now. You get certified people who know the tech, but they don't know why a client should pick one thing or another. It is maddening. And then Tracy goes on to say, it isn't really AI that is killing consulting. It is misuse of the word. Going through a list of do you want option 1 or 2 is not consulting. Don't even get me started on the word transformation. Boom.
Oh, Tracy, you and I are kindred spirits, I can tell.
Yeah, we heard Frank, Tracy. The problem was Frank couldn't hear us, so that was not working. Yeah, Tracy's taking this personal, but yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a little bit maddening, right? Because it's not entirely clear that AI is really doing everything a consultant could do. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's not. But, especially when it comes to research, I think it exposes the vulnerabilities in, static delivery of information versus on-demand information through my AI search tool, which may not deliver accurate information all the time, but it sure is friggin' fast.
So when
we'll give Frank another try. Hi, Frank. Can you hear us?
Hi, am I back now?
Yeah, can you hear us?
We got him. He's here.
All right. Sorry about that.
Frank. Yeah. Frank, man, you made it happen.
I have this high value microphone, which has the unfortunate characteristic of sometimes I lose it. So I'm back to the old way.
No worries. Yeah, it's funny how the high-priced microphones fail us in a pinch. By the way, just FYI, this is not Microsoft Teams. As much as I would love to bash Teams, can't do it this time, but we'll get around to bashing Microsoft Teams again soon. So Frank, we're going to go back and do your proper intro, and then we'll kind of get you up to speed on a little bit of the consulting disruption that we've been talking about. But let's go back to Brian made a special slide for you where he tried to put together all the different parts of your past personas. We didn't really emphasize your Substacks very much there, but you can see it partially under the LinkedIn profile. But Frank is now an active Substack blogger with 2 different themes you can check out. But one of them is a lot of lessons learned from a prodigious services career, which is very timely today. Welcome, Frank. How you doing?
I'm doing very good. Looking forward to this discussion. Wondering what you're going to drop on me.
Yeah, exactly. So what do you want to drop on Frank, Brian?
Well, I actually had the pleasure of working with Frank on a consulting project or two over the years, and which has been interesting because once upon a time I actually got to run a Deloitte project, and before that, obviously I did a ton of Accenture ones. And Frank's all right, on running a consulting gig. He gets it. And
Wow.
and you know me, Frank. If it
What
wasn't,
a glowing
High
recommendation for
praise. That's
Brian.
high praise right there.
Frank's
yeah,
all
well,
right, man.
I'm a tough grader. But anyway, I know Frank gets the consulting business, and it's more of a traditional kind of deal where they're providing what I would call independent advice and counsel to clients. And to that end, Frank's team seemed to be pretty clean when it came to not having any whatever side deals going with software companies, for references, referrals, and that kind of stuff. But I know you have other businesses as well. But I worked with Frank on those.
Well,
What I
I
wanted,
want to share one Frank anecdote because this one is just too good.
Uh-oh.
It was at a Plex show also, Brian. It was some years ago. It must have been like 8 or 9 years ago. And Frank, you and I got wind of we were sitting somewhere, maybe lunch, and we got wind that there was a candid customer feedback session happening. So we were like, yeah, let's crash that. So we were pretty clever, right? So you and I showed up there, and but unfortunately our handler, Susie, she was positioned herself at the door, and she was like, I told the guys, you were going to try to crash this and you can't come in. So, but anyway, that's always been Brian, I don't know where you were at that point in time because I'm sure you would have been along with us, but maybe you were not there. But anyway, that was always Frank's thing. He wanted to put himself in the customer's shoes and the customer's pain points. So Frank, with that in mind, does AI disrupt and threaten consulting or make consulting irrelevant? Why or why not?
Well, it does. It does represent a disruption. And I think Brian or one of you had mentioned that the software industry enterprise software has been disrupted, for decades, really starting with the cloud model and so on. But the service providers that provided the services around the software implementation and support, they didn't change. I mean, we had software as a service, but we didn't have service disrupted in any way. They still continue to deliver. And to this day, it's a labor-based business. They're selling hours and they're selling bodies. And I don't know if you saw this report I just read it before I got on here. Upper Edge had talked about this Deloitte lawsuit with this medical device company, which is like $20 billion. That I mean, it's just horrible what's going on. And this has got to change. It's not sustainable. So you're selling, the service provider, especially the large one, they're selling hours, they're selling labor. And with offshoring and outsourcing, they're selling labor arbitrage. So it's, the same hours, but they're trying to deliver it for a lower per hour rate for themselves so they can maintain their margins. And that is just not sustainable. So, with artificial intelligence coming in, they're all looking at how to deliver their services for a lower cost to themselves and scoop back at least part of that, in terms of their own margins. But again, I'm not sure which one of you, maybe I think it was probably Brian, is pointing out, well, if the service providers can do that, why can't the customer do it themselves? And why do you even need the service provider to deliver those services? And I think that's what the threat is. The threat is that customers are getting smarter and realizing, I don't need 100 consultants in here in a pyramid with a big, a small top and a big bottom, right? If I can scoop that lower part and do a lot of that work myself, I'm going to have a lower overall cost of delivery of purchasing those services.
So a few months back, Frank, I did a piece and I was talking about how, to your point on the pyramids and so forth, you can use AI to do all kinds of things now. It can configure software. It can develop reports. I've seen it build custom training courses in under a few minutes, and we go on and on and on. The fact that a lot of those were not terribly high value added kind of tasks, and certainly not, in my opinion, what a real consultant is all about. Those are systems integrator kind of skills or project management skills from years ago. That's the stuff that's being just, I think, wiped out right now. What's not around, again, is we don't need people to configure a piece of software so it looks just like every other piece of software in that same vertical. It's going to do the same thing. It's not going to provide a competitive advantage. So that just triggers the whole reason to take this to the lowest cost kind of way of delivering that. And the old time materials methods just aren't appropriate anymore. Anyway.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. When I go to shows, I'm always like drawn to the small little SWAT team vendor in the corner of the room that has a cabal of industry experts that used to work for big firms. They banded together and they started building out IP to solve a specific industry problem. Like let's say it's the process industry and there's some end-to-end stuff that's not getting accounted for, and maybe there's some analytics that need to be built on. And they have figured out how to solve the problems that the larger vendors haven't. And when I talk with those folks about AI, they're not intimidated at all. They're not intimidated whatsoever. But when I look at these massive consultancies that always wind up in the headlines for these project overruns like Frank referenced, then I guess I do see a threat there. But I have a hard time imagining that a real SWAT team of industry experts would really be deeply threatened by the technology as it currently stands today. But that's just me.
No, I agree with that. It's the industry expertise that clients are really looking for. Somebody that's done, has not have been around process manufacturing, but just knows that either because he or she's been an executive within those firms, or has just done, 50 projects doing, facilities management, equipment maintenance, product data management, the whole thing around, say, food processing. And just can speak the language and understands all of that in the integration. I mean, that's you can't acquire that just with an AI program or some training. I mean, you got to have the years of experience to do that. But that doesn't lend itself to the business model of, say, the Big Five or the other large systems integrators, because there's only a few people like that, in the world that have that kind of knowledge and experience. But that's what customers are willing to pay for.
Let's hear it for the chat. What do you think about the AI services disruption? Tracy, you have continued to pile on here. You can build, of course, but clients who have people who can learn it, you teach them to be self-sufficient. Well, that's very self-defeating. Tracy, don't you want like multi-year, fat off the lamb projects? The ones that go on in perpetuity? Maybe not. Brian.
Well, but what Tracy's really getting at here is the goal of a consultant is to be not just be a zealous advocate for the client, but is to also they are to put the client's best interest ahead of even their own, which means the best thing she can do for a client is to help the client stand up strong on their own and survive without them. And that's really the mark of a consultant. That's different than maybe a integrator or whatever, or somebody wants to call themselves a consultant, but it's just there to get an annuity gig for the next 5 years. And Tracy's right. You treat clients that way, and they do two things. They create tremendous word of mouth referrals for you because you're not in their back pocket all the time. You're not trying to wallet frack them to death for an eternity. And that's the kind of consultant that they respect. Frank, I could tell, wants to say something here.
Well, again, it doesn't lend itself to that business model of a large pyramid. What the client really wants is those people at the top of the pyramid. Doesn't want everything that comes with it. So absolutely.
Frank, you talked about how the hourly billing, the labor arbitrage, that kind of business is so tired now. Do you think there's a modern way of thinking about that? I mean, I know a lot of people have been idealistically pitching outcome-based scenarios for a long time, or even like some kind of like consumption type scenario. Like, how have you looked at it from like modernizing this business?
Well, clients like that, either a fixed price or a deliverable based model. I don't care how much time you're going to spend writing job descriptions. I want 1,500 job descriptions reflecting this new organizational structure by the end of, March or whatever it might be. So I don't care how you get there. I don't care if you're using AI or you're using, whatever you're doing, but I want to pay based upon, like you say, but on the outcome or based on the deliverable. Clients love that because that lowers the risk and it forces the consulting firm, the professional service firm, to deliver in the best way to deliver that for the client.
Believe it or not, I rarely bill on an hourly basis. I tell a client right up front, this is what it's going to cost. And they either go for it or not. I mean, now if they pull some surprise stunt in the middle of the project, and then yeah, we're going to have to do an adjustment on whether something goes up or down. And that does happen. I mean, I had a client once that divested 42% of the company in the middle of the project, just disappeared, and it kind of really screwed up the economics of things, but it sure did simplify the technology challenges quite a bit as well.
Tracy hit on a really interesting point here too, around sometimes they forget I don't work there. I have to remind them they're paying too much for data entry. Sometimes they still have me billed because they don't have an internal team, or I can provide a more junior person, provide oversight, etc. I think one of the points there that I so fascinated by, and I know what I've tried to work on my own career, is become less and less of a consultant and more of an advisor and something of a truth teller, which admittedly bothers some of my clients. But I feel that my job now is not to just execute whatever the client asks for, but to really give them my best take on whether I think it's going to work or not and why, even if they don't like what I have to say. Frank, you have been reflecting upon your career and in Substack, and I think coming up with a lot of fruitful lessons. Have you thought about those kinds of issues looking back? Like how do you strike that balance between, okay, this is what the customer wants versus like, oh, I really need to advise them on some things too? And
well, that goes back to what Brian was saying about being an independent, advisor. That, I mean, I used to tell when I was doing software selections that it didn't matter to us whether you picked package A or package B or vendor A or vendor B. It didn't even matter whether you chose to go forward or not. So if we felt that the right answer for you, and this came up multiple times, I think I've shared some of these cases with both of you, where we got into the situation, there was really nothing major wrong with the existing system, but the system was getting blamed for a lot of problems that were really internal organization problems. And the easiest thing to do is just blame the system. Say, hey, we need a new system. Okay, we need a new system. But when you really looked at it, all they might have needed was an upgrade, or maybe they needed to change some, procedures on the back end, and they could make that system work and would save them not only a ton of money, but a ton of risk and come out with a better deliverable or a better outcome in a shorter time period. So that to me was always very satisfying, because I wasn't going to make more money. We were going to make more money or less money depending on what decision the client made. We're going to do the best thing for the client. And that was, to me, was always very satisfying. I mean, we could have been a bigger organization, could have made more money going the other way. And that's why it's very hard to find really true independent consultants, because it's so much easier to make money when you're partnering with vendors. But we just refuse to do that.
So to amplify Frank's comments, on a project I worked with him and a whole team of people, what I noticed was Frank's style is a little different than mine, and I would hope so. But Frank is real good about, he uses things like workshops and other mechanisms to draw out from the customer or the client what the real issues are, and drill down a couple levels deep on this stuff to really get to the nub of what's going on. The difference, I'll use variations of some of that stuff, but not to the extent that Frank does. Frank does a good job with his stuff. It's not like I do a bad job anyway, but I have a little bit different view. My job is to push clients. That's how I view my role as a consultant. I got to move them out of whatever space they're currently occupying that they've grown accustomed to and very comfortable with, like a broken in pair of old tennis shoes. I got to get them out of that. I got to move them to a new reality and a new future. And I spend a lot of time trying to just get behind their shoulder blades and shove them, into the future. And yeah, I may bruise a few feelings along the way, but guess what? The client's paying me or us to help facilitate a massive change or transformation, whatever word you want to use. That's what they really want help with. If it's some little incremental piddly deal, they definitely can do that themselves. And any consultant that's so afraid that they might actually lose continuity of work at a client because they had to push the client doesn't understand what their real role is supposed to be. And are they really putting the client's interest first?
Tracy talks about losing money several times, but feeling like obliged to say what needs to be said. And I'm all for that. I mean, I think in the long run, that's your reputation, and you're competing against firms that are not going to deliver the truth. So I think one of the things you do is compete against that by doing that. I give vendors a real hard time about AI and services right now because there's so much talk about customer success, but what I have yet to see is a single vendor that has created the equivalent of a project health check where on a daily basis, the vendor, the service provider, and the customer can view in real time an agreed upon set of KPIs and the status of various things. Now, some vendors have parts of that figured out, but no one has really delivered that at scale. And it seems to me that if you can have a health watch on your wrist to check your vitals, why can't you check your project vitals in real time? And yet no vendor is investing in that. They're investing in other stuff while talking about how great they are at customer success. So there's my second rant of the day done. But Frank, I wanted to ask you, you've been at this a long time. Did you get pretty good at kind of recognizing when a project was heading for trouble versus one that is not? Were there some signs that would really jump out at you?
Well, I think what really counts is there's a lot of, and Brian talked about this in a recent post, there's kind of like reading between the lines with the client. When you see team meetings that are devolving into arguments and where there's a lot of finger pointing, a lot of scapegoating, at some point, I think we're going to talk about toxic management here, and I have a couple things to say about that. But you can pick up the signs in the team dynamics where you're not making progress, and there's, like I say, a lot of blaming or finger pointing, and this thing is going to go south at some point. So, like you kind of read between the lines. The status reports are all good and so on, but there's tension in the room, and it's showing there's probably something that's either not being spoken or something else going on. So you have to be, I think Brian talked about the IQ and the EQ, right? You have to have the emotional and EQ, right? The emotional intelligence to understand that why did I not feel good right now? I come out of this meeting, why I come in feeling good and I leave feeling lousy. What's going on here? So
by the way, Frank, Upper Edge shout out, Ted is in here. So Ted, I hope you caught that Upper Edge shout out earlier. He heard a preacher say you need to make the comfortable feel uncomfortable, the uncomfortable see hope.
Yeah.
The same should be true for independent advisor. That's a good one. I like that.
I like that too. Keep firing those kind of euphemisms in.
So let's shift gears a little bit. I think that was a really interesting discussion. Let's shift gears into this toxic manager thing, which Brian, you have writ a lot on, and you referenced your book on leadership. Can you just give Frank a little bit of an overview on what you're working on there, and let's get his responses?
So there's been a huge push lately by companies who want to satisfy their PE overlords or their Wall Street masters by claiming that they're going to strip out a whole bunch of layers of management. They're going to cut down overhead costs, everything, with the intent that they're going to goose short-term earnings. I'm not convinced that's a great way to go for the longer term, because they're wiping out so many people that they'd leave no time for managers to actually develop talent or let alone meet the people. I referenced one of the articles at the top of the call about, it was either New York Times or Wall Street Journal piece about that your boss has no time for you. we see this in the services space and consulting all the time, where you have to groom and grow the talent coming up through the firm. It just doesn't happen automatically. And these staffing ratios now are just out of control, with one manager for 200 people. That, and it doesn't, and AI tools that are supposedly going to write performance reviews, monitor engagement levels, and recommend training courses and all this kind of stuff. I think someone's taken drugs if they think they're going to get all those aspects of the human condition correct, and that these people are going to want to stay and work for a company where they have no personal contact. And I've mentioned before, people want to be seen and they want to see what's going on. And I think we're making a mistake in companies by stripping out the middle. Anyway, that's it.
Well, I think that's true. And, as we all know, we live in a free market economy, capitalist society. And what's the term? Creative destruction. I mean, we know that this happens. I mean, layoffs many times are unavoidable. So that's part of being in business, and that's part of living in the kind of, economic system that we're under. So that's unavoidable. But what I'm more concerned about is that when you create an environment where employees are constantly fearful for their jobs or their success, the kind of environment that fosters is one that is not productive, that does not produce the outcomes that we want as an organization. And, I was looking back at, Deming's, 14 points of this, talking about this thing I'm hoping I can say a little bit about, called psychological safety. And Deming talked about casting out fear, drive out fear, and that an organization that is fearful, when you have employees that are fearful, they're not going to produce. And unfortunately, in many organizations, there is an atmosphere where employees are afraid to speak up. And it leads to this concept that is kind of come to the fore, even though, like I say, Deming had this in his 14 points like decades ago, right, of psychological safety. And I'm preparing a post on this. So what is psychological safety? It's the assurance that one can speak up, offer ideas, point out problems, or deliver bad news without fear of retribution. And, I've had, Johnny talked about my 50 years career experience looking back. I have been on teams and in organizations where there was a high degree of psychological safety, where if I saw an issue or I saw a problem, I could speak up, or I could see others speak up, and the leader would take that as feedback that was important for the success of the team. But you have other organizations or other teams where there is not a high degree of psychological safety, where people they're fearful for their jobs, or they're fearful of being embarrassed. And therefore they don't speak up. And there's this book by Amy Edmondson called The Fearless Organization that I've been reading through here. And she in the beginning brings up two situations. One is in healthcare, where you have a team of doctors and nurses. And she tells a story of where a nurse might see that a doctor did not prescribe a certain medication for a patient in this condition, but she's afraid to say anything because she will be embarrassed. The doctor will rebuke her. I'm the doctor here. I'm in charge. Just do what I say, right? So what happens is, and they've done studies on this, is that hospital teams, medical teams that have a high degree of psychological safety, the patient outcomes are better, because mistakes are caught early. And medical mistakes, somebody quoted me a statistic the other day, like 20% of the medical, prescriptions are they're errors, right? And so you want to minimize that. And so you get better results, patient outcomes, fewer readmissions, faster recovery, you're discharged more quickly on teams that have higher degrees of psychological safety. The other case she points out is in aviation. And you think about, the flight deck of a commercial airliner, right? the co-pilot sees something or the flight attendant sees something, they need to be able to tell the pilot and even challenge the pilot. You're coming in too quick. You're coming in too fast. They have to be able to speak up. In this Boeing 737 MAX situation at Boeing, now it came out later. So many of the engineers saw problems, but they were afraid to speak up because there was such pressure in the organization to get this plane, approved through FAA more quickly. And they just said, this is going to be a disaster, blah, 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 blah. No, now it all comes out afterwards. But there is a case where human life and safety is at stake. Well, fortunately, most of us do not work in environments where, human, life and safety is at stake. But in business, the principle still applies. And there was a study by Google, I'm going to reference it when I write this post, that found of 5 major criteria for teams. They studied I don't know how many thousands of teams at Google. They found psychological safety. They defined it like we have here. Teams with high degree of psychological safety had better outcomes in project results and team effectiveness by far than the other factors, which were, where were they here? I don't remember what the other ones were. I had it written down. But anyway, it ended up being by far, the psychological safety was the number 1 criteria. So, Brian, it all starts at the top. One comment on Google. We could have a side discussion on whether Google has lived up to that in its own culture, but that's a different story. Frank, that was absolute fire the last 10 minutes. You really brought the heat. But Brian, how does that stack up with your views and research?
So the psychological safety point is right on the money. More than anything else, though, there is a problem in front of this problem, and that preceding or precedent kind of deal is we have a lot of people that get promoted into managerial positions that never should have been put in those spots. They don't know what they're doing. They don't, and to Frank mentioned, they may have some IQ, some technical smarts that were good when they were doing maybe, let's say, a staff person's job, but they lack the EQ to be able to read the room, know what's going on, or they are politicians who want to manage up, not manage down in the company. And I can go on and on. And I think there is a precedence problem, which is, did we get the right people into management in the first place? And then we're going to make them, or are they going to be able to work out for us? Related to that, the other thing I keep running into is all these new AI tools, they only exist if there's a pile of data that can be fed into them. And so what we're creating is a work environment where data is just constantly being captured. It's keystrokes, it's minutes on the computer, and, which actually works to degrade, to Frank's point, the psychological safety deal, because people are just paranoid. Like, I don't even want to get up and go to the bathroom because it's going to look like all of a sudden my productivity slipping or my engagement went south, But, so we've got this. If you rely heavily on AI to do all these kind of managerial things, then guess what? The workers are going to respond by satisfying the AI overlord. They're not going to do what's really required. And
Brian,
that's what Frank's going.
Brian, if I can step in on that one for a sec, I think that this resonates with me a lot because I believe that AI is making the problems that you both described much worse, and it's increasing that sense of lack of safety. It's increasing that look over your shoulder feeling in many different ways. But I do want to point out that you can't just blame the technology for that. Much of this is how the leadership and management team is framing the technology and their narrative about what it's supposed to mean. And just the other day, I was reviewing a CX keynote that was talking about how great this was for customer experience and all of that. And I said, well, yeah, if you're not shooting for headcount reduction at all costs, you never took a position internally on how you were going to use this technology to actually help your team do their jobs better, serve their customers better, but also enjoy their own well-being and growth inside the organization. I believe you could use AI in that type of culture, but you have to be much more definitive about what it is you're doing. And I remember doing a couple of use cases earlier this year where I would ask about this and say, well, what is the culture like as you adopt these AI tools? And the two smaller companies I talked to, they were more like 200 or 300, they were more like family owned. They're like, no one's ever been fired for this company. That's not an issue. We don't fire people. That's not how we do business. That's a totally different environment for adopting AI than what you're describing, where now everything's being measured and you don't know when the next day is going to come along and you're going to be rendered redundant. So I think if you take a different position, that's the start. And most companies don't realize that they have to. They're just going ahead with this. And it's like, well, if you do, what are your employees going to think? Anyway, third rant. That's it.
This podcast has been interesting because while I've seen John periodically get wound up on some points, he's just been consistently about every 15 minutes getting really wound up.
I know, man. I'm blowing gas. I blow 3 gaskets today. I think that's a record. If anyone has any comments in the chat, you've been great today. Tracy, you were on fire as well. We're going to be wrapping the show in just a little bit, so try to get your last sort of comments and observations in so we can comment on them. In just a minute, Frank, we'll shift gears to the closing part. You can stay with us during that segment. Brian, you got anything more for Frank before we get to the final phase?
All I would say is I would highly recommend everybody read some of the other articles that we referenced at the top of the deal, because I think they'll add some additional context to the conversation we had today. Everything's kind of highly interconnected in today's podcast.
I also want to recommend Frank's Substack. Both of them are interesting. They're very different. That's what I'll say. But one of them is really project oriented, and you could gain a lot of wisdoms from the kind of conversations we're having just now. So definitely make sure to check that out. So let's see. And now we are going to the Humorous Aside Whiff of the Month. I gave Brian a bunch of them, and Brian, this is the one you picked. Man, we're picking on fast food joints this month, aren't we?
Well, almost all of them are now owned by private equity firms, which are not my favorite business owners. But I
like this quote. It was about Burger King being hacked. The attackers said they were impressed by the commitment to terrible security practices. They said that the security was about as solid as a paper Whopper wrapper in the rain.
Yeah, that's awesome. The line I love the most of all, right there. If that's your kind of IT security, whatever, that is not exactly what you call a ringing referral reference there. And Tracy, glad you like the content.
Indeed. Oh, thanks. I'm glad you liked the third rant. Yeah, I don't know what got over me today. All right, so we're now to the really inspiring part of the show where we try to end on a higher note, and that's Brian's dog is probably gonna be barging into the room at any moment.
I've got her locked out of the room today. She can't come in here and bother us. So I'm glad we can all enjoy the peace and quiet. And
Brian, give it something that inspires and creates value, man.
I have really kind of seen the light on some AI stuff lately that I'm finding where the best places it should be used. And one of the ones was seriously overlooked, and what I write about in the seismic deal is, believe it or not, the creation of sales enablement and training enablement materials. Why? Because I don't need to worry so much about the person in the middle and hallucinations, because those people are going to be in there all the way, up and down. It's seeing the speed in which you can deal with this. And if you really want an application or use case for how AI can help a company scale, this is a great area, because as companies grow, they acquire more mass, but the amount of change going on in the world continues to keep moving ever quicker, much like what Ray Kurzweil wrote in The Singularity in 2005. Change is logarithmic, not linear. And so how do you handle that if the mass is huge and growing and the acceleration rate of change is increasing? Newton had you need a huge amount of force to handle that kind of combination. Force is equal to mass times acceleration. And what I see now is this really cool way to use AI to build all these things that empower and enable people, not replace them, but empower them like crazy to help them be very successful, and allows companies to like bust through a glass ceiling on scaling that I think could be really powerful. Anyway, sorry if that was too heady.
But... No, that's good. Frank, anything that keeps you inspired in your work?
Oh, Frank, there we go. Okay.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah, no, as you know, I'm actually, I use the term retired from employment, right? Which means I'm not retired, but I am not working for money anymore. But I still keep up with the industry. I still read folks like you. And I'm still very much interested in sharing the things I've learned over 50 years in enterprise IT. So thank you for this opportunity today. And then the rest of my time, as you saw in one of those, is I spend time writing Christian poems and hymns, series of children's books that I'm doing that my daughter's doing, and I'm supporting her on that. So I have I call it the left brain and the right brain, right? So put the two together, it's very rewarding.
Well, Frank,
go ahead, Brian.
I was just going to say, I'll be at HR Tech next week. And for the listeners, I used to run into Frank and some of his team all the time at that show. And Frank sometimes would have either he himself or some of his people would bird dog me the whole way through there.
It was great.
And I was happy to do it because I really believe we should always be giving a bit of ourselves to help move another generation of people up through the ranks. And
right.
I think I scared the daylights out of some of your team members doing that. But anyway, John, what's your inspiration thing real quick?
Oh, well, I had a couple. I actually wrote a poem this weekend for the first time in a few years, which felt really good. It's really cool sometimes to step outside of your comfort zone. And my big hope for the next generation is that they pull aside from their phones sometimes and give that a go. Because there's nothing that beats trying to put your own expressions into writing in some form. And
what's the poem about?
It was a tribute to a high school friend of mine who
beautiful,
who moved on from this earthly plane a few months ago, and I couldn't get him out of my head, and so I wanted to write something. But it's cool because, like, honestly, like, all of this stuff that happened to me in my life, it all came about because of sitting in front of a computer or a notebook and writing and just trying to create my thoughts. And it's kind of cool. What an incredible adventure. Like, I got to meet people like the two of yous and get in all the trouble we got into. And, it all started just with creation. And that's what I hope that people don't lose track of in this particular era, because these tools can be very powerful, like Brian said, and inspiring, but there's also something inside yourself that needs to be excavated. And the longer I'm in this industry, the more I appreciate the chance to do this on my own terms. And I hope everyone watching finds your way. I think Tracy articulated that really well, but find your own role in this industry and don't just become like a cog in some consulting firm somewhere, but find your own path. And I hope you do. And with that, I think we're done for the week. So Frank, you're welcome to hang out backstage for a sec. Thanks everyone for joining. And we got another show lined up next month with a real heavy hitting HR tech guest. You're going to be impressed. So Brian, good luck on the road. Catch you guys soon. Take care.
See you guys.